Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to do a 2-in-1 on The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. First, I'm going to be talking about the new VR mode that was added via a recent update to the Nintendo Switch version of the game. Plus, I'm also going to re-review it, because I think it's about time, don't you think? The game's been out for over 2 years now. However, for those of you that are picky about resolution, just so you know, I tried capturing footage of the Switch version when I rented it for the sake of testing out the VR mode, and I was only able to get about 16 minutes in before my capture card went kafloot. So I'm going to be juxtaposing footage of both the Switch and Wii U versions, so hopefully you won't mind the 2-pixel difference, because honestly, the games look pretty much identical side by side. You practically need a magnifying glass to tell. So, first off, let's talk VR. So obviously, unlike Super Mario Odyssey, you actually need the Nintendo Labo VR Kit in order to experience this. There really isn't a, oh, you can play without the goggles if you want mode. Basically, what it does is it adds a head tracker to Breath of the Wild, and that's pretty much it. There is nothing that you can do with the VR mode that you can't do by just tilting the right stick. If I felt like, whoa, I want to look at Death Mountain right behind me, I could just easily do that on the Wii U just by moving the right stick in the correct direction. It felt like having the head tracker and a camera at the same time felt kind of unnecessary. Now, I did like how for some of the cutscenes it sort of added a subtle 3D effect, almost as if I was playing this on a souped-up 3DS. But on the other hand, when the game would switch between cutscenes and gameplay, a lot of times the camera would get stuck in really weird angles that I swear my memory is not going badly. I do not remember the camera being that awful on the Wii U version. In addition to that, sometimes the Switch would slide out of place, and so as a result I would have to move it back and forth as I was watching the cutscenes, because sometimes my selections would appear outside of my field of vision, or Link's head would be cropping off the top of the screen. Now, yes, there is a resolution dip, and yes, sometimes Link will appear pixelated if he's too far away, but overall, the experience was tolerable at best. Basically, the only thing the VR mode really adds, besides the 3D effect, is that it has a head tracker. So if you want to look around with your own physical head, you can do that. However, there's nothing that you can view in VR that you can't just normally view using the right stick. Basically, as cool as it was to be like, whoa, I can turn my head and see Death Mountain in the distance, I could just as easily have done that on the Wii U, just using the right stick, on the gamepad alone, and it would have had the same level of oomph to me. So after I completed the first Shrine of the Great Plateau, I just gave up. I was like, I am not going to review the entire game in VR. That's just not worth it. So, as you can imagine, I did complete the entirety of the Great Plateau, plus a little bit of the game outside of it on the Nintendo Switch. And my thoughts are, oh my gosh, the Wii U version is unquestionably much better in the controls department. For starters, I tried playing with just the Joy-Cons, and I felt like they were okay, not exactly my preferred method, because the Wii U's button layout is much more spread out. Also, when I tried using amiibos on the Switch, sometimes it either wouldn't read the amiibo, or I'd have to tap them very specifically on the right control stick, which involved me moving my hands below the Switch, which felt super inconvenient, whereas on the Wii U, you just did it on the AR icon on the gamepad, and it was so much smoother and easier. I didn't even have half of the problems with amiibos as I did on the Switch. Now you're probably like, Paul, not everyone is going to have amiibo. Why are you spending a whole 2 minutes complaining about it? Well, it's because most people don't even give the Wii U version a second look. And you know what? It's about time I try to defend it when everyone else is saying, oh, you gotta get the Switch version no matter what. In addition to that, I also found that in handheld mode, the difference between the Wii U and Switch wasn't actually that big of a difference. Sure, I could see a little bit more particles during the opening cutscene, but that was about the extent of it. The graphical difference really isn't that big of a deal. Now, on to the re-review. So when I first reviewed Breath of the Wild, one of the things that struck me the most was that the game allowed me to do stuff that previously was only available in concept art in previous Zelda games. I used Ocarina of Time as the example, how most of the concept art depicted Link doing these amazing combat scenes where he'd be back to back with Sheik surrounded by enemies, or he and Ganon would be in this intense sword fight to the death, but yet the actual game didn't really allow for that. Breath of the Wild, on the other hand, not only allows for it, but it allows you to do things that the game developers themselves didn't even think was possible. There are times where I would be like, oh, there's no way the game's going to allow me to do that. But it did. If you want to paraglide off of a cliff and land on a horse's back, you can. If you want to ride an undead horse, you can. If you want to, say, dress up as Phantom Ganon, well, you'll have to pay a little bit extra for the DLC, but you can do that too. Basically, the game gives you almost unlimited freedom. And one of the best ways that it achieves this is by two very simple systems that I'm honestly shocked are not in more open world games. For starters, you get the Paraglider pretty early on, which lets you glide through the air for as long as you have stamina in your gauge, instead of resorting it to an artificial magic meter like it did in the Wind Waker. This allows for a lot of horizontal movement in the air, hence why Nintendo was hesitant to call this game an open world game and instead insisted that it be called open air, because a lot of the freedom really comes from how much horizontal ground you can gain in the air as opposed to on the ground. In addition to that, they also allow you to climb any surface you want, provided it's not inside a dungeon or a shrine, because, well, you don't want the gameplay to be unbalanced, because otherwise the dungeons and shrines would just be totally broken. So this is actually the first Zelda game that was named after the overworld, as opposed to some kind of MacGuffin or some poetic title like A Link to the Past. So Nintendo clearly put like 90% of their effort into making a believable, explorable Hyrule that just went on for hours and hours and let you go from one end of the map to the other without a single loading screen. And to this day, that is still impressive. Sometimes I'll just boot up Breath of the Wild just for fun, just to say, I want to just explore the overworld and see how much I can do. Because, let me tell you, even years later, I'm still discovering new secrets when I try to get footage. So, Breath of the Wild basically has 3 distinct points to its storyline, and that's roughly speaking, because you can technically make as many phases as you want based on how you like to play the game. There's exploration, there's the dungeons and shrines, and then there's the story. Exploration really is up to you, so me talking about it would kind of defeat the purpose. If you want to go straight for Ganon, you can go ahead and do that. If you want to take your time and explore the scenery and not even get a peep through the storyline and you're already 20 hours in, who's stopping you? The shrines, on the other hand, are a little bit more of a linear, traditional Zelda dungeon feel. There are 125 of them in the base game, and then there's like 16 more in the DLC. So there's roughly 140 mini-dungeons to be found. Some of the dungeons don't actually have any puzzles at all. You actually have to solve puzzles in the overworld to get to them, and then that is the reward in and of itself, was the trial into opening the shrine, and then you'll just get an automatic reward. Other shrines are a lot more complex, and they involve block-pushing puzzles, puzzles that involve tilting the gamepad, or I guess if you're playing the Switch version, the Switch itself, to manipulate an object. And these are the closest you're going to get to actual Zelda dungeons. Now, in my original review, I was one of the few people that actually praised Breath of the Wild's dungeons, for lack of a better word. They're much more open and linear than you would expect in a Zelda game, because without spoiling them too much, just in case you haven't experienced one, I'm just going to say they remind me a lot of the structure of the dungeons in Majora's Mask. You often have the ability to fully take control of the dungeon, and you have this one goal, but you have multiple ways of getting to the goal. Again, I'm really trying not to spoil stuff because the internet and Smash Brothers does a great job of just completely ruining the shock factor of these games, but suffice to say, you can go to one room before you go to another and do it in a completely different order than someone else. And it's a structure that you don't normally see in a traditional Zelda dungeon. For that, I give them praise. Now, subsequently, the dungeons have gotten less and less fun to play, mostly because they're kind of thematically boring on the inside, and they repeat the same boss just with different attack patterns every time. Thankfully, the DLC more than makes up for it. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the DLC because I already made 2 separate videos just talking about them, but suffice to say that if the main game doesn't give you enough of a challenge, the DLC certainly will. The main draw of the first DLC pack, which is called the Master Trials, is the Trial of the Sword, which lets you return the Master Sword to where you found it. Well, obviously you're going to know that you get the Master Sword because, again, Smash Brothers. And you have these 3 sets of trials where you're removed of all of your equipment except for whatever runes you have, like, say, Magnesis, Cryonis, and Bombs. And then you have to rely on the resources given to you during the trial itself in order to defeat hordes upon hordes of enemies. When you complete this, you feel like you were a true Zelda master, and nothing can stand in your way anymore. Even the original Zelda felt easier to me after I beat this, and I've never been great at the original Zelda. Other than that, there's mostly just little itty-bitty tweaks here and there, like additional armor, the ability to view your entire journey via a line on the map. But that's pretty much it as far as the Master Trials go. Oh, and there's a Master Mode, but apart from the enemies regenerating their health and some additional floating platforms with more enemies shooting arrows at you, there's not much to the harder difficulty. Champion's Ballad is really where it's at. It has more story elements for you, plus more shrines, plus the ability to ride a motorcycle. I would say the DLC is worth the $20 just for the motorcycle alone, because it is so much fun to cruise across Hyrule on what should be a Mario Kart vehicle. Oh wait, now it is. But it's in a Zelda game, and it's absolutely unreal. And the way it came into the game was just because the director kept saying, I want a motorcycle, I want a motorcycle. And the team was so tired of him saying that in the office that they finally just said, all right, we'll just shove the motorcycle in for the DLC for this game. And it was well worth it. The story, on the other hand, was not. I was expecting the story to sort of pick up where the true ending of the game left off, but sadly it's actually just more memories of the champions and going into more details about Link's past. You know, I was kind of hoping they'd resolve the plot line where Zelda said, this is going wrong. Link, let's check it out. Maybe it's Nintendo's way of saying, oh guys, you should just be patient for us to make an inevitable Breath of the Wild sequel. But honestly, they built it up as saying this is going to be a continuation of the game and outright lied to us when we actually got the DLC. Now, that's not saying these new cutscenes are bad. On the contrary, they're some of the best animations in the entire game. And I actually just found this out like a couple of months ago, which I forgot to mention in my original review. You can actually review all of the new memories that you get in the Champion's Ballad in the Memories section of the Options menu. So you can literally view Link's journey in total chronological order, DLC and all. And that's cool, even if the payoff isn't. However, once you get past the new story content, you actually get an entirely new dungeon, which in my opinion is one of the best in the entire Zelda series. Number 2 only to the Stone Tower Temple in Majora's Mask, in my opinion. It just messes with everything you've ever known and then tells you, okay, you think you know Breath of the Wild so well, let's see how well you can handle this. And the final boss at the end, which is not a copy and paste of what you get in the regular dungeons, is an absolute blast, even if he's a pushover if you've overstocked on equipment from amiibos, which I'm not ashamed to say that I have, because when I first beat the game, I didn't use amiibos at all. Other times around, I just said, heck with it. Speaking of amiibos, I know I keep bringing that up, but if I'm the only one that's going to talk about it, so be it. Even with the update, they still haven't fixed the problem. And that's if you have Zelda-specific amiibos, you can sometimes get fan servicey types of equipment, like being able to dress up as the fierce deity from Majora's Mask, or having the shield that Link uses at the beginning of Wind Waker. That is amazing, even if you don't want to use them, because then you have to go through the ordeal of getting them all over again. The problem is that they drop at random. Sometimes you'll spend upwards of an hour just trying to get one piece of equipment because you scan the amiibo, it doesn't get you anything, so then you have to reload your save file, scan them again. To make things worse, you can only get one piece of equipment per day. So if you want to, say, get the entire Fierce Deity outfit, you have to scan the Majora's Mask Link amiibo 3 different days. And that's just frustrating. Thankfully, nothing is game-breaking if you have the amiibos. Like, yes, there's stuff that you can't get in the main game, but you're still more than capable of beating it without it. You just have to use a little bit more management skills as far as your inventory, which is honestly one of the best parts of this game in my opinion. The ability to say, no, okay, should I shoot this fox with an arrow because I'm running low on arrows, or I really need more food, so should I do that? When you're at a cooking pot, you sometimes ask yourself, okay, is it worth it getting more attack or more defense? Because cooking is honestly a lot of fun. You try to find the best combinations of items and see how many recipes you can come up with. And it gives me fond memories of playing the first 2 Paper Mario games, trying to figure out which ingredients to give to Taste Tea and Zest Tea, respectively. Where Breath of the Wild stumbles the most is obviously its story. Most of the story takes place in the past, so as a result, most of what happens in the present is basically just find a way to help Zelda in Hyrule Castle. And that's mostly it. Like, sure, when you go to a major village, they'll say, hey, we have this catastrophe that we need you to solve. But usually the catastrophe is more or less just, hey, this dungeon is the result of the problem. And if you can get inside the dungeon and defeat the monster inside it, then everything will be back to normal. That's a super boring and predictable story, in my opinion. I kind of wish that maybe they would have, say, had just enough story in the present to counteract what happened in the past. Then maybe the game would feel more engaging. Because if you're going straight to Ganon without any of Link's memories, I don't know, it sort of feels more like a speed run than an actual narrative. And in a game this ambitious, where they put so much effort into the overworld, I wish they would have put at least a little bit more effort in the story, especially because I love visual novels and I love games with strong story elements. So that was a really big disappointment for me, was to be like, oh, that's it? The whole plot is literally just defeat Ganon with whatever means you have? It may work for some people. Maybe some of you will like the emotional oomph of some of the trials that Zelda and Link had to go through back in the old days. Personally, I only found minimal enjoyment out of these. In my original review, I said that the voice acting was better than most people gave it credit for. In hindsight, I do think it's kind of lacking compared to other games I've played, but it's still not awful. I mean, have you heard Rivali's lines? He kind of reminds me a little bit of Han Solo, and it always gives me a chuckle. Although, now that I've heard Zelda's lines in the opening of World of Light in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, it kind of makes me wish that they got a younger actress for Zelda, as she does sound like a 40-year-old woman, and she's supposed to be like 16, so I'm pretty sure most 16-year-olds do not sound like that. Although I have met a couple, so maybe they're going for the exception rather than the norm. Horseback riding is also a huge joy, although once you get the motorcycle, horses become kind of pointless, so still, when you're traveling around besides just on foot, Breath of the Wild is an absolute joy and brings back all the great feelings of galloping across Hyrule Field and Twilight Princess, even though the game doesn't really have any designated horseback battles. To make up for it, entering each dungeon is an absolute joy. Every dungeon has sort of a get inside of it type of mode, along with dramatic music to go with it, and these are honestly better than the dungeons themselves, in my opinion. Now, getting back to the music, Breath of the Wild has some amazing instrumental pieces. It's just kind of rare when you get to hear them. Most of the time, the game prefers that the sounds of the environments are the music itself, as opposed to having a sweeping orchestral tune saying, "You are galloping across the field," which makes sense. You're in a post-apocalyptic wilderness that's mostly destroyed by Ganon. In addition to that, you want to immerse yourself in the wild, and having music overthrowing the sounds of, say, the birds and the crickets, you would lose that atmospheric feeling in the moment type of thing, and I wouldn't have it any other way. However, when the game does get instrumental, it's amazing. The usage of real instruments is handled really well, especially when you march into Hyrule Castle and it literally feels like you've been preparing for this moment for so long. And even though the final battle is a little bit lacking, I still think the build-up going into it, especially if you decide to go to it early, is stellar. And in my opinion, there's no other game that makes you feel like you have to prepare this much to go into a final confrontation. So if the next Zelda game is going to learn from this game's mistakes, it's keep the preparation, but make the battle a lot more climactic. Don't make it feel like it's sort of a, oh, that's it? It's done and over with? No, make it something memorable, something that players are going to think about it years back and say, dang, now that was a battle. And honestly, I feel like I've only just scratched the surface on the great stuff to be found in Breath of the Wild. There's just so many little tricks and Easter eggs and nods to Zelda's lore, as well as people still debating on where it places in the timeline, or people saying that the timeline shouldn't exist at all. And the fact that you can't narrow down everything about Breath of the Wild in a single review just speaks volumes about how much it accomplishes in the Freedom Department. Heck, Arlo had to do a big fat stinking review of Breath of the Wild, and it took over 3 hours on YouTube with all of it combined. Like, that's how much this game has to offer. So with that, this is currently my favorite video game, closely followed by Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. I cannot recommend this game enough, and I think the $60 price tag is well worth it. Generally speaking, Nintendo's $60 price tag video games are extremely lacking because they usually have just not enough content, or they feel like just a prettier version of one of Nintendo's earlier efforts. But Breath of the Wild has so much to do and so much to see that I kind of feel like $60 is a little bit generous. If Nintendo had, say, charged $100 for this, I would have said that feels like a more worthy price to me, because I've played this game for 2 years now, and I've only maybe gotten like 20% on my percentage gauge. That's how much this game has to offer. This is going to keep you coming for years and years and years to come. And even though the rewards for 100% completion are kind of lacking, spoiler alert, a bunch of poop is involved. But just getting to as much or as little as you want is as close to this being a Sakurai-directed Zelda as you can get. Buy it now. With that, thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions or comments or concerns about how I did this, please leave them in the comments section. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and let's hope they can make a Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows video game like this. That would be so amazing. Bye!